Welcome to
Hello.
the This Is Not Therapy Hour.
We are live.
Brandon's about to do his entrance.
I'm just getting set up still. Good to be with you all. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
And I'm Caitlin Miller.
And we are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons.
So many reasons!
Look at this banter.
I have to start doing like a complimentary tone, like, this is not therapy for so many reasons.
I don't know at all what you're saying there.
I'm trying to match the, what is it, timbre of your voice a little bit more, because mine is like, but yours is like...
But matching something is not being complimentary.
But if you're in a choir, you don't want to have different timbres. You want to have similar timbres, but in different octaves.
So there's elements you want to be similar, but other elements that you want to be different.
Okay.
Anyway. I have a habit of when I talk on the phone, I pace, and I've been on the phone for a few hours this morning and pacing around.
It's hot in this office.
And it is hot for some reason that I don't understand.
Did you turn down the thermostat?
It's set correctly. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm wearing a t-shirt instead of what I usually wear because I'm a little bit sweaty and I don't want to wear a sweater or whatever.
I'm already warm.
Maybe my vents are closed or
It
something.
kind of seems like they are. Maybe this is like an April Fool's prank.
We're glad to be here. This is not therapy. What it is an open conversation. Caitlin and I are here talking with one another and with
you.
And with you, all of you, which mostly you exist, even though you really exist. Our knowledge of you is just an imagination. We're making guesses about who you might be and what you might be interested in. If you are here and participate in the chat, put comments in the chat, then obviously we have a lot more information about who you are and what you're interested in. And just like any conversation, we're all impacting one another. The things that I say impacts what Caitlin thinks and says, and what you say impacts what I think and say, and same with you all. So we love it when people participate in the chat. We do start with a topic just because what else would we do? Sit in silence. But we don't have to stay on that topic. If you're here and you have thoughts or questions or whatever, go wherever you'd like and we'll follow.
Fast Insider, you do exist and I can see your comment.
We do, well, okay. We work with
Sorry, that was an exciting comment.
Yeah,
I couldn't stop myself.
And you read it.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah, we love these glasses.
Wait, do you have a pair of glasses that enables you to read it?
No, they're all the same. I was just saying that as a joke. My contacts and my glasses are all theoretically the same prescription. It does not feel as though it is, but...
All right.
Is that a red face laughing?
It's a crying, laughing face.
Oh, okay.
The question is, can you tell what this is?
An echocardiogram?
What?
I can't tell. It looks like a red line going up and down.
It's that sugar cube that they put in sometimes. Anyway, we work with a therapy practice that does
a lovely therapy practice.
Individual, couples, and family therapy. Our office is in Northbrook, Illinois, birthplace of John Hughes.
Birthplace of two of your children, right?
Well, I guess.
Which is, I don't know.
Technically, they're all born in Evanston because that's where the hospital is, but we lived here when two of them were born, yes.
There's a chance I was born at the same hospital as your children.
Were you born at Evanston Hospital?
I can't remember. I think it might have been Evanston Hospital.
Cool.
Wow. What a small world.
For therapy, we can only work with people in the state of Illinois. We also work with a few executive functioning coaches who can work with people anywhere in the world. Yeah, that's where we're at.
These comments are public?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons it's not therapy. It's public. We're on the internet. Anybody can watch it. So
we repost it, or it stays on the internet.
Yeah, it stays up.
If I remember. At least on YouTube.
I think it automatically stays up on YouTube.
On YouTube, yeah, but on Twitch, I try to remember.
The energy here today as well. It is an interesting energy today. It's probably because it's so hot and I'm wearing a t-shirt and slightly sweaty. That's definitely...
Also, nature is in full bloom. She's not letting us ignore her. Oh my gosh, she's so pretty.
I didn't mean to suggest that that's actually the reason. I was just...
Oh, I know. But I was like, if Brandon's gonna make up random reasons, I can dive into how much I like making up random reasons for things.
I think all the things that you and I each named are relevant variables, but
They are just like,
probably don't have huge impact.
how can you measure the impact?
Right, you can't. I know that
And what do you
question
mean by
people will
probably?
ask of like, if you could have any superpower, what would you have? But my answer for a long time has been, if I had the ability to like think about anything and get an immediate like list of all the variables that impact that thing and like a number or a weight of like how much that thing is impacted by each of those variables, starting with the most impactful at the top and working on the way down, that would be my superpower.
Out of everything, you would choose that?
Yeah.
Oh, I would choose time travel.
I don't know why.
Ancient Egypt? Come on, dude.
Dangerous and boring and
What? Boring?
yeah. You want to know something? Okay.
1920s France. I don't know. That's
First of all,
arbitrary.
you really want to go
Speak
any time
easy.
where there was not readily available indoor plumbing?
I would love to like meet Nina Simone. I mean, almost all of my
Time
favorite
travel-
people are dead. At least my parasocial relationships.
Okay. But that would also have been the case if you lived in a different time.
But if I time traveled, I could be a part of every time.
Yeah. If you showed up in ancient Egypt, I
Mhm.
can't imagine it would go well for you.
I could stay just long enough before I had to go to the bathroom, and then I could come back here.
Well, I mean, like anyone, first of all, you don't speak the language.
It would be fun to observe.
And then anyone who saw you would be like, what the? You have red hair and
I can. Maybe I'm like Lilith or something. That's a whole other thing.
Lilith, the
There's like a whole.
biblical entity
I need
that also has like demonic and witchcraft associations.
Yeah, I know someone who wants to name their child Lilith, and I was like, bold choice.
Since I was in middle school, I wanted to be able to create a separate bubble dimension outside of time, which I could decorate however I wanted, fill with pillows, and take naps and read without any fear of time passing.
That's amazing.
That was my answer for a long time when I was younger, was the ability to pause time and exist outside of it so that I could sleep as much as I wanted and yet still be able to like use 24 hours a day.
You would sleep with that extra time?
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
because then you could use regular time to do stuff. If time is frozen, there's a limited number of things you can do during that.
But if there's an infinite amount of time that you can freeze, then why would you just want to sleep?
Because you need time to move to do anything.
That's so practical.
Well, all right. I'm
Fast
approaching this
Insider says I
question.
would sleep definitely.
Yeah, see, at every time, why not use?
I would just
A lot
make
of this is
art.
like a
I would not sleep.
taking the question very literally kind of a thing, because like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if time's frozen, you can't even turn the page of a book or whatever, right? Like if it's only you exist outside of time, then you can only either sleep or think, you know, like can't interact with the
But
world.
wouldn't think relate to time?
Well, theoretically, you exist outside of time. So anything that only involves you,
Then maybe I could plan art projects in my mind.
yeah, that's thinking. Anyway, really, it was just a desire to always be energized all the time and never have to sleep, really.
I think the reason why the energy is different is because you just got off a lovely phone call and I had a great weekend.
That's, I'm sure, also impactful variables. Yeah.
I think it's the most impactful. It's about 25%.
You have this superpower.
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
It took me, how long have I known you? 5 years to tell you?
I would love an archival brain because so much of my life is oriented around trying to retain and retrieve information that I want to keep, but I feel like that superpower would be a monkey's paw too easily. Yeah, no, that would be...
What is a monkey's? Is that an English expression?
Monkey's paw is... I don't know the like origins of the folk tale or whatever, but there's a story or a myth, I don't know, about a monkey's paw that grants wishes, but all the wishes turn out to make everything worse for you, basically. It's like a be careful what you wish for, like an overly literal genie.
I think it
kind of
would be
thing.
fun to remember everything I've ever enjoyed learning.
That's leading us down a whole conversation that is interesting, but I actually have a topic today.
You do? What is your topic, Brandon Tusser?
Well, because last week someone asked a question
Oh.
towards the end, and we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it.
Was I there?
I think you were there when the question came in, but then you had to leave.
Oh yeah, I also have to leave before 2.
But suffice to say that way of talking about it requires that you think of knowledge and information in a very particular way that doesn't really map to the reality of it.
I was actually thinking yesterday I want to talk to you about what remembering means because
Most memories are primarily reconstructions.
But particularly like remembering what you say and because I've been getting these weird mixed messages from different people in my life in different areas. But what was the question that was asked?
The question was how, I should have looked it up again, but I was busy right up until the time we started. But effectively was, I work, when when the thing you're interested in and passionate about becomes your job, like how do you still engage with it on your own terms after working in it all day?
Oh, that's a fabulous question.
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients get to that juncture.
Right. That if you're a musician and you get a job as a studio musician, how do you at the end of your workday still go and like play your own music?
Oh, I was thinking of that as literally doing things that you want and getting paid for it and then wanting to do more things. But you're saying within context where it's like you're doing a thing that you love but not in the exact way you want to do it?
Right. That you're working in the field of your passion,
Okay.
but not getting to do exactly what you want to do.
Oh.
How do you still have the energy and whatever to do that? According to Wikipedia, Monkey's Paw comes directly from a short story written by a guy in London in 1902.
I feel like Bast Insider is like are helpful. What are those? Aren't there like shows where there's someone like looking up the facts and then?
Yes, many types of shows have fact checkers. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but like not.
Or research assistants.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Brandon Tussers? About if you
about the question?
Yeah.
See, now I really wish I had gone back and looked at all the comments because they added some clarifying information.
Can I look at them again? Will it show up on my phone?
Probably.
Oh, I guess that's what we say every week.
But I'll start with like the version of this that I remember, and then we can, if we get more specific information, or if you're here again today, you who asked this question last time. But a version of this question is a very common question to get, something that people struggle with a lot. And there's like, my friend and I sometimes talk about being each other's Na'vis. Na'vi is a helpful / annoying character in a very famous video game who like hovers around and calls your attention to things and stuff.
Ooh.
ADHD Na'vi who hovers over your shoulder and says things like, "Hey, listen, your pasta's getting overcooked."
That sounds like a useful person.
Yeah, Na'vi is useful, but
Fantasy.
as I've shared in the past, to me, annoyance is when something calls your attention to something that you don't want to pay attention to. Right? Like
It's working, it's live streaming on the website.
if an alarm goes off and calls your attention to something, even if that's helpful, like that's not something I would have otherwise been paying attention to. So anything that draws your attention in a particular direction is annoying. And as long as you're within certain limits, you're not annoyed per se in sense of like feeling that way. But yeah, eventually it's like, shut up. That's not what I'm looking for right now. Right. Anyway.
It's not letting me go to the last one.
We had talked a little bit last time about backing up. I was talking about how people get stuck with what I call sticky answers, where there's a problem. The first thing that happens is that you evaluate the problem and ideate on a potential solution until you come up with a potential solution. And then you enact that solution, and either it works, in which case, great, the problem is resolved, or it doesn't work, in which case, Great. Now you know that that thing doesn't work and you move on to trying to come up with a new solution. Sticky answers to me that's the phrase I use for when you come up with a solution that hypothetically, like theoretically, would resolve the problem, but you aren't able to actually enact it to test. So you can't find out that it does work or that it doesn't work because you can't get yourself to try it, or for whatever reason you can't try it.
And you were saying a lot of people come to therapy with sticky answers?
Well, that is true. But in the context of this, what I was trying to point out is even though it is at least theoretically accurate, but I assume it is accurate in this case, to say, I am struggling to do the thing I want to do at night because I work in this field all day long. That's not a testable, actionable theory, right?
Yeah,
unless you're willing to change your job and not work in the field anymore, there's nothing you can do about that particular element of it, right? So then what you got to do instead is look at other potential solutions. And that's obviously why they were here asking, is like, okay, obviously I'm not going to switch my job, so what can I do other than that? And what I want to reframe for people is that being unable to enact the solution, or take unable out of it because that means different things to different people. If you come up with an idea of something that might solve the problem and you don't enact it for whatever reason, you don't put it into action to see if it actually works or not when you do it, that means it didn't work. A solution that isn't enacted is a failed solution. So whether or not it hypothetically would work doesn't matter. It's time then to say, well, can't enact that one. Let's go back to the drawing board and come up with a different idea of what might be going on.
That's really helpful. I feel like a lot of people don't give themselves permission to think of something new until they can be like, I definitely tried this thing.
Well, yes, although I wouldn't use the term permission there,
That makes
because
sense, yeah.
the brain is a cognitive miser we talk about a lot. It doesn't spend resources without a reason. And so coming up with an idea to solve a problem is something that takes resources, and you don't do it when you already have one.
Yeah,
So the
that makes
classic
sense.
example is you're tired, and then you think, why am I tired? Because I didn't sleep enough. I just got to go to sleep early tonight, and then I won't be so tired tomorrow. And then you don't for whatever reason. And then the next day you wake up and you're still tired, and you don't say, how can I be less tired? You say, how do I get myself to go to sleep early tonight? So now you're trying to solve the problem of how do I enact the solution that I came up with instead of the initial problem. And there's always other things that you can try. Are there other things that could affect how tired you feel besides going to bed earlier? Obviously there are.
Do you
But
mean
people get
always
stuck.
in all cases there are other things to try with
Yes.
problems?
Always in all cases, there are always other things to try, because that's the reality of existence in human life. Is there is no such thing as a scenario in which there is literally only one option.
Yeah.
Now, it might be difficult or impossible to come up with something else that seems as likely to work. But again, something that you're not enacting, either because you're unable to or for whatever reason, something that you're not enacting also doesn't work. So move on to something else. That's what I call a sticky answer. If you have an idea of how to solve your problem, but you just aren't able to test that idea, then that's a sticky answer, and it's time to consider it a failed idea and move on to another one, or coming up with another one. So if we back up, and this is where like getting specifics from the person would be helpful.
Yeah.
If we back up and we just say, okay, we want to specifically identify what is the thing that you are intending or attempting or wanting to do that you are not doing. And we're just going to make stuff up for this, because if they're here, they haven't given us any information. But so we'll say, I want to work on.
Did they say specifics about the career?
I don't remember.
Okay.
If they did,
I
I
tried
forgot.
to find it.
But
I unfortunately couldn't.
I don't think they did, but if they did, I
Okay.
forgot. So let's say we're just going to go with working on your own music. You know, that's the thing. You want to, at night, you want to write your own music.
Yeah.
And you're not doing that. So first, I like to reemphasize to people, the question that is important is, what is worth trying next? Any other question, and especially the question of why is this happening this way, can be useful, only if you're asking that question in service of the real one, which is what's worth trying next. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to say, why am I not doing this? Well, it's because I'm working in this field. That's great, because then you identify, oh, well, that's a variable that I can change. I can stop working in this field.
Mm-hmm.
But if then there's other reasons or whatever that you can't enact that, then it doesn't really matter if that's accurate or not. So I'm not arguing against somebody's opinion about, I'm not arguing with somebody's theories about what's going on. We just want to identify what's worth trying next. What?
Where are you going, Brandon?
I'm going to just like common things because the person isn't here, unless you or Bass Insider or somebody has an actual example of things that you're like trying to get yourself to do or intending or wanting to do and then not doing.
I might have well, are you saying things that relate to like your day job, that like the job you do?
It doesn't need to be that specific, because what we're saying now is we have reframed this to just like any other question. There is something I am intending to do, wanting to do, planning to do, and I am not doing it. In this case, one of the theories about why that's not happening is because, but at this point, that theory doesn't matter anymore, because even though it's accurate, it doesn't enable us to do something about that particular factor.
I'm happy to throw something out unless Bass Insider has something.
Well,
I can just start throwing it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I was thinking about the other day that I would love to get your thoughts on, brainstorm, is I had a lifelong goal of writing a book, and I actually did have a theory where, I'm thinking so much as a therapist that it's hard for me to sit down and focus and write at the end of the day because I'm using so much cognitive effort in my job. And I don't know exactly what type of writing I'd want to do at this point, but I feel like returning to that part of me might be really beautiful and useful.
Okay, great example. May or may not match the parameters of what the person was asking about, but a great example.
Yeah. And if they want to jump in, I'm happy to switch anybody. So,
So there is a difference in identifying here that it might be about the cognitive energy you're spending during the day, as opposed to it being that the field is related.
Yeah, those are different.
Because there are things you could theoretically explore where you still do your job, but you spend cognitive energy in a different pattern, right? You think less, or you do more things to restore that particular kind of energy.
That makes sense.
But in addition, in this case, let's leave that part aside. Well, you've identified an aim, not an action, right? I want to write a book someday, but you also said, I don't really know what I'd even write about.
I was thinking about starting with sitting in front of a computer for something like 20 minutes a day and just writing whatever comes to mind and seeing what happens, because I feel like if I frame it as I'm going to write a book or something like that, it could just end up being useful journaling or something.
Great. And that's a great action to plan to take. But it is disconnected from the initial aim that you said of wanting to write a book.
How?
Well, because if you're doing that, like what you just described is just sit and write for 20 minutes and see what happens, which is totally an actionable thing to do.
Yeah.
But that is not the same as doing writing that I think will eventually hopefully lead to me writing a book.
Oh, I think I'm stuck on the morning pages thing where like if you do an info dump writing at some point during the day, then something might come to you that more resembles like creative work. But I think I'm
Well, that's a valid theory.
But it's a theory, yeah.
Well, no, it is a theory, but it's a valid one, and I think it's likely to be true.
Yeah.
But it means that the action you're taking is not actually just seeing what happens. It's just write some words so that some stuff comes from it that I can write into a book someday.
Oh, yes.
And so that's what the language I like to use for some of this stuff. It's the ancient Greek philosophy words of hedonic versus eudaimonic joy. Hedonic joy is something which is joyful in and of itself. The experience moment to moment is enjoyable. Tasting something that is tasty, like feeling something that feels good. Those things are enjoyable in and of themselves moment to moment. Eudaimonic joy is stuff that is enjoyable because it's meaningful. So, I finished that thing that I needed to finish, and now I feel really great about having finished it, is because I accomplished something that got me closer to where I'm trying to be. Where doing it in and of itself wouldn't be enjoyable, but it's enjoyable because I got closer to my goal. Or, doing a certain kind of volunteer work where the activity itself isn't enjoyable, but it's enjoyable because I am contributing to something that matters to me, or living out a value of mine, or something like that. And I think that's helpful, or I think that's likely to be helpful when a person's framing something as, I work in this field and therefore have trouble at night, is you might want to look at engaging with the thing in a hedonically joyful way at night, because theoretically all day long you're doing the eudaimonic stuff, right? Where the actual activity in and of itself isn't enjoyable to you, but it's your job, so it's worth doing and valuable to do because it leads to a reward or whatever. Depending on the job, one of the things that will happen with eudaimonic joy is that, in terms of like the accomplishment equation, right, that doing things takes resources but also has value when you accomplish those things. When we're talking about energy, that people will often refer to as motivation or whatever, doing something that's eudaimonically joyful gives you energy. It takes energy to do it, but it gives you energy. But it only gives you energy when you complete it. So if I'm like,
because then it's like the fruits of your labor have.
Yes, and we can look at it from like a neuroscience point of view also, where like we're talking about, I hate to bring this up, but just to make the point, dopamine. Dopamine is released upon task completion.
Like every task?
I don't
Or
think
are you
that the
talking
science
about
is there to say 100% of the time, but when you set an intention, when you have a conscious, like, I'm aiming to do this thing, and you do it, you accomplish it, then dopamine is released. That's why it's called the reward chemical. That it feels like you've accomplished something. It's also pleasure chemical, but that's a different usage of it.
Would hedonic joy be that dopamine is released during the activity too?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not a causal thing, right? Like,
oh, okay.
It's not that if dopamine is released during the activity that makes it a hedonic thing. It's just that something which is, like, I like to say, like, this looks like this and it sounds like this. And it's the same phenomenon, right? But seeing it and hearing it are two different ways of observing the phenomenon. It doesn't look like this because it sounds like this. It doesn't sound like this because it looks like this. It's just two different ways of observing the same phenomenon. So when it comes to things like neurochemicals, dopamine in particular, when we say that something is enjoyable and that dopamine is released during this activity, those are two different ways of observing the same phenomenon. It's not enjoyable because dopamine is released. Dopamine is not released because it's enjoyable. One is just the way that we observe it if we're looking at neurochemicals in the brain. One is the way that we each experientially observe what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yeah, generally I would say that dopamine is, if in the action of doing the activity it is enjoyable, which also means dopamine is being released, then that would be hedonic. If not, if the activity itself isn't enjoyable / there's no dopamine being released, but on completion or in thinking about it in a certain way, then it becomes enjoyable / dopamine is released. That's eudaimonic. So one thing that will happen to people is, especially with certain kinds of jobs, is that they'll open up a bunch of tasks or make progress on a bunch of tasks without completing those tasks by the end of the day. And that's the day where you get home from work and you've got nothing left because you poured everything into stuff and you didn't get any of it back. The fun thing about this is it is entirely up to you, your way of using language to set these things. Meaning, if you say, I need to write a book, then you don't get the reward until you've written the book.
Which is a lot of work.
Right. And when you get it, it'll be a huge reward, but you're going to have to slowly pour resources into it that you're not getting back out of it until a lot further on.
Yeah.
Or you can say something like, well, today I'm going to write for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And then when you do that, you get the reward. And it's going to be a much smaller reward
Mhm.
than writing a book, but also you get it back as soon as you have written for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
So, same with work tasks. If you identify them differently, as opposed to something like, I need to clear out my inbox. This is a common one. I need to respond to all those emails.
Mhm.
Where then if you respond to 30, but there's still 20 left at the end of the day, you still are like, I still need to respond to these emails.
Mhm.
Where instead, if you're like, I need to respond to this email, and then you do, great. I need to respond to this email, and then you do. So that's one thing to look at, is redefining what it is you're trying to accomplish, especially things that have big, like any aim that has the word more or better or anything like that in it, terrible, impossible to accomplish. A super common one for neurodivergent people, I need to be more productive.
Ah.
Literally impossible to accomplish, because no matter what you do, you could still be more productive.
Mhm.
So you never ever get that reward. You never feel like you've accomplished something and get the energy out of it. So you're
Yeah.
just pouring everything into it and getting nothing back out.
Ugh.
I feel like it would help me a lot. I think that's me. I feel like it would help me a lot to break down tasks so I can get the reward of checking things off my progress list. But thinking about the task and understanding it enough to break it down is also stressful and difficult, so I procrastinate even more on doing it. That's a great point.
Ooh.
A couple things. Number one, I am assuming that this is a like euphemistic use of the term progress list, meaning like the things I have on my mind to get done. But just in case, and it's helpful to point out there, having task lists, to-do lists, whatever, is counterproductive. It makes the problem worse. This is not a like a effective artistry thing. This is like well and thoroughly researched.
Mhm.
It makes things worse because the cost of adding something to your list is negligible, but the cost of doing those things is not negligible.
Yeah.
So you're always adding more to the list than you're able to check off.
Mhm.
And it focuses you on, is this thing a valuable thing to do? Would it be
Mhm.
beneficial or helpful to do this thing? If the answer is yes, it goes on the list. I should clean my room. I should call so-and-so. I should return that text. I
Yeah.
should research this thing, right? So it prevents you from evaluating how valuable or what specific value the thing has. It's just a binary. If it's valuable, I add it to the list, right?
Mhm.
If it's a good idea, something I should do, I add it to the list.
Mhm.
And it prevents you from evaluating the cost of the thing. What will it cost me to do this?
Mhm.
So you will always end up with way more stuff on your list than you can get done. Nobody, if they use a to-do list, nobody checks every item off of the to-do list. There are ways to make that better for you, right? Like you can have a rolling to-do list where the things I didn't get checked off yesterday get added to today, and I add the new things or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's still not great. There is, without spending too much time on it, there is benefit obviously in writing things down or recording things that you had an idea to do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go into the weeds too much on that, but if you do that, I would suggest both literally calling it, but also conceptualizing it as a menu. Not a list of things that you're trying to do,
Mhm.
but a list of ideas that when you are going to do something, here's your menu of these. At some point I identified all of these things as potentially valuable.
Mhm.
Because that changes how you then approach the list. Instead of
Mhm.
saying like, I have to do all these things, it's
Mhm.
you're evaluating each thing. How valuable is this thing? Is it still valuable like it was when I put it on the list? How much will it cost me to do it, etc. So I have a set size for my short-term and long-term to-do lists, and I write them both out every week. So I reevaluate whether I really need this on my priority list, which is better than the usual way of doing these things. But you see, it also leads into language like need, right?
Yeah.
This binary sense of, does this belong on my list or not?
Mhm.
A kind of like standard piece of advice for this is to do time blocking, where instead of making a list of things, whenever you come up with something that you want to do, you put it into your calendar, and that way you have a built-in like an evaluation of cost.
Mhm.
And when you go to add something to your calendar and it's already full, then you have to say, what do I bump? Which is kind of what you're talking about here, right? That I need
I
to bump
really
these
liked the
things to
time
make room.
blocking.
There are even more, I think, efficient ways of doing that, but that's time blocking is one that like you can make that suggestion and it's not impossible for any individual to use it. Does that make sense? Evaluating energy is much more useful than evaluating time for one, but it is not, you have to build the system for that. I don't know why I'm like speaking in this weird halting way.
Why are you speaking in this weird
I don't
way?
know. I don't know. I
Are
think
you halting?
in like the pauses in my, I keep pausing and saying
Oh,
things.
yeah.
I hate time blocking, the stress of having no place to add it, but my calendar stresses me out so much.
Oh, interesting.
Sure. That also likely means that you have too much stuff on your lists. If trying to find a place for it on your calendar is that difficult and stressful, but not necessarily. Also, I try to make this point to people a lot. Time is not a resource. When people say I need to work on time management, you can't manage time. You can't save it up. You can't spend it at a faster rate. That's like saying,
Or a slower rate.
or a slower rate. That's like saying I struggle with space management. Like space is not a resource that you collect and spend. It's just the thing through which you move, right? So when people are talking about time management, they're actually talking about behavior management. I'm not doing things that I want to be doing at the times I want to be doing them. Much more useful typically is to talk about energy management, because everybody has that experience, including in this particular question, right? I set this time aside at night. I have this intention to do this thing. And when the time comes, I am free because I blocked it off. I have the time available, and yet I still can't get myself to do it. What's wrong?
Yeah.
Well, time is not a resource. There are other reasons you're not doing it. And that's the point. We're back to the beginning, is evaluate what are the reasons. One of those, like you just mentioned Bast and Cider, and like you were talking about Caitlin, one very common reason is I'm not exactly sure what to do, right? Like the thing I'm intending to do, I've defined it in my mind in a very big way. And so the specific action to take when it comes time, I don't. You're talking about, I want to like break it down into a bunch of subtasks, but when I can't do that, then I feel stressed. And you use the term procrastination. I hate having that much structure. Well, okay. That is also part of the problem with to-do lists, and I get it. I don't use time blocking, and I don't generally recommend it, but it's better than to-do lists. Because in both these cases, people end up treating the tool as though the tool is correct, right? Like a to-do list or a calendar are things that you are creating in order to help yourself do something that you're trying to do, right? It's a way that you in the present moment are trying to control you in the future to some extent.
Yeah.
And they're useful tools. But if you approach them as though when you follow what you put on the tool, you succeed, and when you don't follow what you put on the tool, you have failed, that's what makes them not work. And that's part of why I don't like time blocking, is because people do tend to think of it the same as a to-do list. When you look at your to-do list.
Is this too linear of a question, but is the next step energy management? When
Generally,
you're saying time blocking is usually more useful than to-do lists?
So I guess what I would say is the optimal, and this is not actually practical or actionable, just the optimal. Optimal would be for any task that you're considering, you evaluate all of the conditions, including the resources that would be necessary to accomplish that task. How much energy will it take? What information do I need? What tools do I need access to in order to, you know, all of that stuff. Because if you have all of those things, including the energy, the attention, the awareness, like if you have all those things, then you'll do it unless a higher priority thing comes along that draws on the same resources, right? In other words, if you think about doing a thing, if you have an intention to do a thing, you'd want to do it. This is one of the things we're trying to eliminate, is this idea that if I want something enough, I do it. And if I don't do it, I just didn't want it enough. That is not the case.
So in that theoretical scenario, when you're going through everything and understanding all aspects of the task, are you saying that then you do that in that moment? Or
you don't actually That's not an actual thing that you can do.
Yeah.
I'm saying that I'm setting it as like the goal state so that the closer you get to that, the better off you are.
So then the goal state wouldn't have an outcome? Because you said then you do
Theoretically, it would. You just can't actually do that. You can't actually know. That was the superpower, right? You can't actually know every variable that needs to be known, right? Like you
I guess I'm getting stuck with this is time again.
What?
I'm like, oh, like the first part makes sense, the premise of understanding all aspects of it. But then the second part is like, well, but then would it be like, okay, I'm going to try this when I wake up tomorrow because I'll feel refreshed and have more energy and I have all the tools and
That's
a
reasonable thing, yeah.
Okay, so that's okay.
Yeah, you just can't actually know for sure everything that is involved, but we do our best to come up with. So you were asking about, is energy management the thing I would recommend? I do generally recommend energy management stuff, not because it is definitely or even like, not because it is the thing which will solve the problem, but because it is the thing that in my experience, the gap between how much people pay attention to it and how impactful it is the largest gap of all of these things in a general sense.
Yeah.
Like people are very aware of time, but it doesn't have that big of an impact on what you're doing. Energy has a huge impact because energy is required for literally anything that you do, including things that you don't even consciously do. When you are asleep, your body is utilizing energy. And energy is this complicated, weird thing, but everything you do requires energy. So it's generally a good place to look because it impacts everything. And it's generally a good place to look because people have not paid much attention to it. This is the point of like laziness, motivation, desire, wanting it enough, is that in our culture, we don't talk like energy is a real thing, right? Like, I just didn't have it in me to do that. Well, if you were motivated enough, if you wanted it enough, right? Like, there is this belief that humans somehow break the laws of physics and that we can somehow just create energy out of thin air by thinking about something in a certain way. But energy is an actual thing that exists in the universe. And you can't create it out of thin air. You can transform it from one form to another, but you can't just create it. People get confused because part of what we mean when we're talking about energy is our perception of our own state. And there are things that you can do, in fact, things that all of us do pretty much every single day, that change that. Meaning something can happen and I feel like I have so much more energy. And because of how we use the language and it's unspecific, that's a true statement, right? Like I'm feeling very energized sometimes just means I feel like I have all this energy to spend. Adrenaline in your system is one of those things. Fight or flight will make you feel more energized, but it doesn't actually create energy. And again, energy is complicated and it's different things. And that's
do you have any ideas on the differentiation between when you feel like you're more energized and then when you've actually gained energy? How to test that? Is it just you try to do something?
No, because feeling energized and having more energy, again, maybe another time we'll delve more into like, this is same with want. This is a big part of the problem is energy is a word that gets used to mean a bunch of different things in different contexts, but because it's the same word, all these things get conflated and mixed up with one another. But in terms of your ability to tell whether you have more energy or just are feeling more energetic or whatever, it's no different. The problem isn't in getting yourself to do that thing then and there. The problem is things which make you feel more energized but don't actually correspond to having energy is going into debt. You're borrowing against the future. When you go into fight or flight and your body dumps adrenaline into the bloodstream, among other things, yes, you get more stuff done physically, not cognitively. Makes you worse cognitively, which is a big part of the problem of panic attacks and things. But yes, your body moves, right? Like that's the point of it. But if that was sustainable, then our bodies would just have adrenaline in the system all the time. The point is that there's a button we can press more or less where it's like, okay, it's so important to do things right now that we're going to do things that'll damage us later, but that's fine because if we don't do them, we won't have a later. So push, run when you don't have it in you to run, fight when you don't have it in you to fight. And so it's not a matter of changing whether you get the thing done, it's a matter of sustainability over time.
That makes sense.
And many people, most people, I would say, in our culture, not having data for this, just anecdotal, most people are in a pattern where to get through the structure of our day, at least I'll say most people who identify as being neurodivergent, in order to get through the structure of how our days and our weeks are structured, we rely on borrowing from the future every day. And sooner or later, you can keep refinancing and putting that off, but sooner or later you have to pay that debt. And that's a large part of what we're talking about with burnout and meltdowns and things like that. Maybe that's why a weekly short-term, long-term list works for me. I mostly treat it as a way to get tasks out of my head so I don't worry about remembering them, and so I can get the happiness from checking them off when I clear things. Yeah, that's the great part about making lists and writing things down, is to just clear out your working memory so you don't have to remember them. But it's something I try to tell people to remember, whether it's time blocking lists, whatever, is whoever made that, right? Like when you're looking at this plan that you created, that was a past version of you that made that. That was you, but with less information and less experience. So the person who made that was not perfect, and therefore the tool is not perfect.
Yeah.
And when you look at that time blocking thing and you're like, nah, I'm not going to do that right now. The past version of you was making a guess that at that time you would have the energy and the other things necessary in order to do it. When it turns out that that guess was wrong, that doesn't mean that the present you failed because the past you made a perfect plan.
Yeah.
It means that past you made a guess and it turned out not to be right. So you just say, good job, good effort, let's try again. These tools work really well when you approach them that way.
Is that more of the menu thing that you were talking about?
Yeah, using that language makes it more likely in general that a person will think of it and approach it this way. Right, because nobody goes to the restaurant, looks at the menu and says, well, I'm supposed to eat all of these things. And even though I can only eat this much right now, I'll do that and then I'll come back and eat the rest later. A menu is, here are a bunch of things you might want to eat. Pick which ones you're feeling like right now. So we're associating it with that language so that you approach it that way. And it still feels good, because the thing about, I know everyone talks about it feels so good to check something off the list. That's not the thing that feels good, is the physical act of checking it off the list. The thing that feels good is accomplishing the thing you intended to accomplish. Checking off the list can be a nice symbolic moment, and it in itself can be an enjoyable thing too. But you don't need to have a list to check things off of. If you have like, okay, I intend to do this thing and you do it, you feel good. That's just, we are wired that way, that when we accomplish what we consciously intend, it feels good. That's part of being human.
As a heads up, I'm going to go in a few minutes.
Okay. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you, then you're in debt and you'll definitely need a big nap later.
What is the quote from?
Yeah, I don't know. But at first I was like, oh, this is some cool literary quote. And then I was like, maybe Bass Insider just made this up right now. Either way, it's cool. That the first part of it is so poetic, and then the second half of it is like so colloquial. I like it. Anyway, back to, okay. So it may be that you don't have the energy to do the thing that you're attempting to do or intending to do. It may be that you don't have the information, meaning one common version of that is you don't exactly know what to do, right? Like, I want to work on my music is a good intention, but what exactly am I going to do that? I don't know. And especially when it comes to art, Rudyard Kipling. But the second half of that you changed, right? Fast Insider, you reworded the second half about the being in debt and needing a big nap later, or is that part of the original quote? Because if so, either way, I want to look it up.
That would be a fun writing exercise, to be like, take an interesting quote and then add whatever you want to it or change it. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. If there's something...
The first three lines are from his book.
Oh, okay. If there's something you are intending to do and you are not doing it, it means one of two things. Either the things which you need in order to be able to do that thing you do not have, or something else that is an even higher priority came up instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is helpful for people to frame it that way, because the idea of procrastination, for example, is a terrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a defensible idea or a logical one, and it certainly is not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. The last line originally is, "Accept the will which says to them, hold on." You know, there's a whole conversation to be had about a lot of the underpinning of Western culture is this idea of conscious mastery of the body, that your thoughts matter more than your physical existence. And if you can make your body do things by thinking, good. And if your body does stuff regardless of what you think, bad. That's a lot of what we're still talking about, is the moralizing of that. So if you get rid of the idea of procrastination and reframe to, if I'm intending to do something and not, it's because either there's something necessary for me to do the task which I do not have access to,
Mm-hmm.
which can include energy and attention and whatever, or something else more important needs to be taken care of in this moment or with these resources. Now you can't think of anything as procrastination. If you intend to work on your music, but you play a video game, then either you can't afford to work on your music, and playing the video game theoretically is something that either gives you resources that you need in order to be able to get back to working on it, or just is something that you can afford and has its own benefits. And so you switch to something, like, would it be better to buy the thing that costs $1,000 and will last and is high quality for my whole life, or the thing which costs $100 and is only going to last for a year before I need to replace it? Well, better to get the $1,000 thing. But if you don't have $1,000, you do the $100 thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or that somehow the playing the video game thing is more valuable in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
If you evaluate things that way, it changes everything about how you look at what you're doing, and it's all way more useful. It's not about feeling better about what you're doing. It's about having a more accurate understanding of what's going into what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason you're doing the things that you're doing. When you center the things that you're not doing, I should be doing this, but I'm not, then all of your thoughts and questions around, how do I get myself to do the thing which I am not doing?
Mm-hmm.
In order to do the thing which you are not doing, you must not do the thing which you are doing, and you're not putting any thought into, why am I doing what I am doing?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, if you ask people what they're doing instead, they will say nothing. I'm not doing anything. And that is not true.
Mm-hmm. Because it's not possible.
Yeah. Sitting in a chair, looking at the wall, laying down the floor, these are things.
Mm-hmm.
So what you identify as being a thing, something
Mm-hmm.
that you're doing, and what's nothing, tells you a lot.
Shall we end the stream together, or am I leaving?
I wanted to say a couple more things.
Then I'm gonna leave. I'm so sorry.
All right, good to see you.
Actually, one of my favorite hours of the week.
I'll wrap up here in a minute. So either you don't have the energy, the attention, you don't have the tools necessary, right? Like, if I intend to write a song on guitar, but I don't have access to my guitar, I can't do that until I have it. Or the concept of what you're trying to do is broad enough that you don't have a specific action. Caitlin's example of, I can sit down and do free-form writing is a great example, but then you got to change your intention is, I'm just sitting down to write, not sitting down to write so that I can write a book, because that turns it into a different thing. Generally, if you are doing something which is unpleasant, but eudaimonic joy, right? It's worth doing because of what it means. Then whenever you do that thing without any observable sign of being connected to the reason you're doing it, you become resentful, right? If I cold call people, then I'll get more clients. The first cold call you make, I'm assuming here, because it is true for me, but I think for most people, that the cold calling is unpleasant. The first call you make is unpleasant. If you get a client out of it, cool, awesome, yay. If you don't, if you make another cold call and don't get a client, if you do that for a day and don't get any clients, a week and don't get, like, the longer you're doing it without getting the result you're doing it in order to get, the more you start to get into, this sucks, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm resentful, I'm going to stop doing this thing. The ideal is to find things which are both hedonically and eudaimonically joyful, I am lucky enough to be a person for whom that is true in my work. I genuinely, in and of itself, enjoy the conversations that I have with people. I'm enjoying myself right now, regardless of anything else, but I also find it to be meaningful. And that's probably a large part of the distinction between working in the field and doing what you want to be doing in the field, right? Is that the work is not hedonically joyful, even if it's eudaimonically joyful, where what you want to be doing is both, theoretically. So evaluate, what is it that you don't have but need when the time comes that you're intending to do something, and or evaluate, what is it that you are doing at that time instead, and why is that so valuable? What about that is so valuable? Because you can theoretically replace that, right? If it's, I'll give something more practical that is quite likely relevant here and is often relevant to things like this. It's telling when people say end of the day. The ability to override impulse, to make ourselves do something that we have the impulse not to do, or to make ourselves not do something that we have the impulse to do. That is something that takes resources. And as a general rule, there are things go up and down all day long and whatever. But as a general rule, you have more of that available in the morning. You use up a lot of that during the day without getting replenished. Night, the closer you get to when you're going to be going to sleep, the more tired you are, the worse time it is to attempt to do something that requires some effort, making yourself doing something that you don't just have the impulse, your body has the impulse to do, or stopping yourself. There's a reason that so many people who are working on changing bad habits, those habits are happening at the end of the day, right? All day long, I go do really well with what? All day long, I intend to go to bed early, then the night comes and I don't. All day long, I intend not to snack tonight, and then the night comes and I snack, whatever. So as a practical answer, it would be interesting for the person who asked this question, attempt to do your version, whatever it is you're wanting to do for yourself. Try and do that before you go to work and see what happens. It may make it so that you're not able to get through your workday the same way, and that might be a problem, in which case you don't do it. But it will still clarify for you some of the things that are going on. If you do it at the beginning of the day before you get to work, obviously there's a lot. You might have to wake up earlier, and that could be problematic or difficult or impossible in its own right, whatever. But you can look, that's one of the ways to start to look at, is this an energy thing? Because can I do it when I have the energy available in the morning but struggle at night? And then you focus in on how to spend less energy during the day, or do more things that recover energy for you, or at least adjust your aims on what it is you're attempting to do or intending to do to work within the parameters of the energy that you have available, so you don't keep setting yourself up to feel bad about failing to follow through on something you intended. If it's an idea or a knowledge thing, I don't know exactly what to do, you can explore that, breaking it down. Generally, I guess, especially with art tends to be a thing where people focus on the cognitive element, the idea of it, coming up with the idea. They think of it as a task of being creative, but there are physical components as well. Like Caitlin was saying, yes, writing a book is partly about coming up with what to say and choosing the words. It is also partly about literally just typing words on the keyboard. If you're struggling to do something, especially in the realm of art, try switching to just focusing on the physical element of the task, right? Like, the intention I'm setting is to just put my fingers on the keyboard and type words for 20 minutes, and that becomes accomplishable. If that's the case, that tells you some things, right? That eliminates some things for you. But just generally, you cannot approach any of this stuff, but especially what we're talking about here. I'm not working on the things I want to be working on. You can't approach any of this stuff as though it is possible to do everything you are doing and more stuff. That is literally impossible. You're doing something every moment of every day. Your body is engaged in something, right? By definition, to do something you are not doing, you have to stop doing something else that you are doing, right? It's a zero-sum game. Not time, but your physicality. Your body can only do so many things. And then you need to evaluate what you are doing, what purpose and function it's serving. And if you're going to stop doing that in order to do a different thing, you got to find a way to replace that function, right? If, for example, something that I have struggled with on and off is that at night I'll eat a ton of food after like 8 p.m. and it makes it so I don't sleep as well. And, I tend not to make as good of choices and I'll get headachy during the day because I'm not eating enough, whatever. And if I just say to myself, well, I can't eat at night, that doesn't work. I do it anyway. If instead I identify, why am I eating at night? Well, I didn't eat any lunch today. I probably only ate maybe like 1,200 calories before 8 o'clock. Well, in order to be able to then not eat afterwards, then I probably need to be eating more beforehand, right? Same thing with if I'm trying to get myself to work on some project at 8 p.m. and I struggle to do that because I instead am watching TV, well, then the watching TV is doing something for me. And in order to cut that out, in order to be able to do the other thing, I have to identify what it's doing and how I can get it elsewhere. Most of the time, most likely, this boils down to you're doing too much that requires the expenditure of resources during the day and not enough to recover those resources. And so the later in the day that it gets, the more you start to shift into things that don't take as many resources and give you more resources back, which means things that are easy and enjoyable. If at night, as the day goes on, you're doing more and more stuff that's easy and enjoyable instead of stuff that's difficult but enjoyable or easy and productive or whatever, then most likely it means that you got to look at your day of how to get through it while spending less and or recovering more so that you have some left at the end of the night. All right, I got to go. There's just a million things I could say about this. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Best and Cider, for joining us in the comments. I know if you had that extra temporal bubble to mention. Going to be with you all. We'll be here same time, same day next week, Monday, 1 to 2 p.m. Central. Goodbye.